Peter Credlin, live on Sky News Australia.
Good evening, welcome to the show. Well, what a day. Here's what's coming up tonight on Credlin. Tonight, over 500,000 Victorian homes are without power as one of Australia's largest coal-fired power stations, Loy Yang, suffers an outage. And it sent the spot price of energy in the state soaring. More on that shortly. We'll cross live to get you the latest. In his Closing the Gap speech today, the Prime Minister confirms he's pushing on anyway with treaty and truth-telling, regardless of how you voted in rejecting his voice. Jewish Australians are today suffering the modern digital equivalent of what happened in Germany and Poland in the 30s. Their homes and businesses targeted. Former Deputy Prime Minister John Anderson later on why we all need to stand up to this and be counted, Jewish or not. And it's clear the coalition smells blood in the water when it comes to the inept Immigration Minister Andrew Giles, who yet again gave a woeful performance in the Parliament, where the only thing he was clear is that he's not across his brief and he's not up to the job.
Can the Minister please explain why he misled the House?
In Senate estimates last night, it was confirmed that the Minister, not the Community Protection Board, is the final decision-maker in relation to the conditions placed on the 149 former detainees.
Can the Minister inform the House if the whereabouts of any of the 149 criminals is unknown?
But first, what a shocker of a day for the Albanese government. First on the great lie of the Uluru Statement, then followed up by another question time of incompetence for Immigration Minister Andrew Giles. First to Uluru and its three heads, voice, treaty and truth. The Australian people might have voted no, but Anthony Albanese is still saying yes, as the Prime Minister's annual Closing the Gap speech today shows. The Australian people might have voted no resoundingly to the voice, but that won't stop our tin-eared Prime Minister pushing on with treaties and so-called truth-telling, the other two demands of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Today, Albanese confirmed his government was still pushing on with the Makarrata Commission or Treaty Commission. At the same time, he's encouraging the states to do treaties of their own. And he remains committed to developing a new truth about Australia, at a cost, I might say, of almost $30 million, which is Labor speak for rewriting our history.
As we take the time needed to get Makarrata and truth-telling right, the work of treaty goes on at a state and territory level.
As if a country, let alone a non-sovereign state or territory, can make a treaty with its own people. Now, the real truth is that what happened on the 26th of January 1788 and onwards, the truth is it's been overwhelmingly good for Australians and Australia. Of course, it hasn't been all plain sailing, and people have suffered along the way, especially in earlier times, Aboriginal people, but also at times our migrants too, and women. But the PM's focus isn't on what brings us together as Australians. His focus remains, as it was last year, on what divides us. And today Albanese doubled down on the separatism that's actually at the heart of Indigenous disadvantage. The Aboriginal people who live in our cities and towns, who go to schools and universities, who've got jobs, who start businesses, who have seats in the Parliament and jobs in the media, well, they are not disadvantaged. It's those who don't go to school, live in the places where there are no jobs, that have the poor life outcomes that produce the dire overall statistics, and that's mostly those who live in very remote Australia. Now, as a country, we have never been less racist, never been more colourblind. And as the slight over-representation of Aboriginal people in our Parliament shows, without quotas or affirmative action, 99% of us want to elect people on their merit, not their skin colour or identity. But not Anthony Albanese. As his statement today shows, it's special programs for this and special programs for that.
So I'm pleased to announce that we are establishing a National Commissioner for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and young people. The National Commissioner will be dedicated to protecting and promoting the rights, interests and well-being of First Nations children and young people.
I mean, we've got ministers, departmental secretaries, agencies. We've got commissioners for young people. Now we're having commissioners for Aboriginal young people. I mean, more of everything announced today that's causing the problems in the first place. Because we'll never get better health, wealth and housing outcomes as long as too many children in Aboriginal communities don't go to school, when adults don't go to work, when settlements aren't safe, often because they're not policed, or if they are, some of the police stand back because of culture. Now, the Australian people know that. That's why they rejected the separatism of the voice. And it's time our Prime Minister listened to us instead of lecturing. All right, now to Andrew Giles and another appalling performance in the Parliament today. Have a look at his inability to answer simple questions. Stuff as simple as, can you account for every one of the 149 foreign criminals you released into the community?
Does he know where the 149 are or not?
If anyone who thinks they can get away with those, we will find you and everyone will face the full force of the law.
Can the Minister now tell the Australian people how many of the 7 murderers and 37 sex offenders released into the community by the Albanese government are not wearing ankle bracelets?
What we heard in Senate estimates was a detail of the relentless effort that has been made by the government since November last year to maintain the safety of the Australian community. Can the Minister inform the House if the whereabouts of any of the 149 criminals is unknown? One of the first things that we did in response to the High Court's decision was to set up Operation Aegis to ensure that our agencies and state and territory law enforcement agencies have the capacity to share information so that they can work across the country to keep the Australian community safe.
All right, as someone who advised government, here's what's telling to me. I look at that and I can see that Giles can barely make eye contact with the opposition. Now, they've got him on the ropes and Giles knows that. What's more, the colleagues behind him in Labor, they know that too. Look at them all looking down at their desks, embarrassed to be seen on the same camera shot as him. He sounds weak, he looks friendless. Even with the past 2 months to bone up after his shocking effort on this issue just before Christmas, Giles is still floundering. He's not across his brief. He's captive to his notes. He inspires no confidence in anyone that he can turn this train wreck around. Now, what on earth was he doing over January? Because getting this mess fixed, well, that was his only priority, and clearly that didn't happen. For a government that was 10 foot high and bulletproof after their tax win last week, Giles is their suicide bomber this week. Now, he has blown apart Labor's swagger, and they know it. For a bloke that was a lawyer before he entered Parliament, Giles has made some really basic mistakes as minister, like this.
In Senate estimates last night, it was revealed that on 8 August, 14 September and 12 October last year, the General Counsel of the Department of Home Affairs met staff in the Minister's office to discuss the legal prospects and policy options that led to the release of the 149 hardened criminals into the community. It was further revealed the Minister did not attend any of these meetings. Why?
And I say once more, it was the decision of the High Court that required the release of the individuals.
Order.
As Minister and as a member of this government, my number one priority has been doing everything I can to keep the community safe. Now, that continues to be my commitment.
So there wasn't an answer there, was there? A whole lot of blather. I mean, 3 times he could have been briefed on that looming issue of the High Court loss. Before the loss happened, there were plan Bs, there were contingencies there, but he didn't front up. 3 times he could have had plan B up his sleeve, but the work wasn't done. And here's what's interesting too about those dates. Now, I can't confirm where he was on the 8th of August, but on the other 2 dates, on the 14th of September, well, he missed that High Court briefing because he was off attending a Voice rally in Canberra. And on the 12th of October, another one of those dates, he missed another High Court briefing with his department because he was in London. He was in the UK chasing votes for the Voice there as well. Now, it staggers me too that the Prime Minister's office was not putting Giles under more pressure over the summer to get on top of this issue. After all, I mean, the PM chose to keep him in this portfolio. They could have moved him out. They could have reshuffled him. So the Prime Minister and his office, they own this suicide bomber. This is their man. This is their pick. They've left him there. And so they are responsible too for the damage this is doing to Labor's momentum from last week. Now, if you don't think stories like this cut through in the real world, then you're kidding yourself. Given the crime wave impacting the suburbs and almost every one of our capital cities around the country, community safety is a massive issue. And this will be hurting the Prime Minister at a time when he's desperately trying to put a bad 2023 behind him. Yesterday, Giles tried to tell the Parliament that he wasn't responsible for this mess because he'd outsourced it to a community group of public servants.
Can the Minister confirm the 7 murderers and 37 sex offenders released from detention are all wearing ankle bracelets?
And I can confirm, as I think I've made clear earlier, that the management of everyone in this cohort is determined by the professional men and women of the Community Safety Board, who have been providing evidence-based assessment on the application of those measures, the subject of laws that we all supported.
This is how he tried to explain away yesterday the fact that the government had made not one single application to put back into detention any of those 149 criminals. And yet today, we find out this.
In Senate estimates last night, it was confirmed that the Minister, not the Community Protection Board, is the final decision-maker in relation to the conditions placed on the 149 former detainees. Given this, can the Minister now tell the Australian people how many of the 7 murderers and 37 sex offenders released into the community by the Albanese government are not wearing ankle bracelets?
What we heard in Senate estimates was a detail of the relentless effort that has been made by the government since November last year to maintain the safety of the Australian community. And a critical part of that was, of course, the establishment of the Community Safety Board, a body composed of eminent law enforcement and other professionals to provide us with expert advice on how to manage this cohort in the community.
What a mess. I mean, in the end, the Minister is the final decision maker, so the buck stops with him as much as this hapless politician might wish it did not. Before he came into the Parliament, Giles made his name as a lawyer who acted for the illegal boat people on the infamous Tampa boat in 2001. And I think that's ultimately where his sympathies lie. Now, he's an odd choice for the immigration portfolio given that. And his recent performance in the months just previous show he's not just a weird choice, but he's a poor choice as well. Well, a lot around today across Victoria for the latest on that big power outage. But let's go to Canberra now for the headlines. Sky News political reporter Cam Redden.
16 years on from Kevin Rudd's apology, the Prime Minister has delivered the latest Closing the Gap report, the first since his failed Voice referendum. It shows only 4 of the 19 socio-economic targets for Indigenous communities are on track to be met, while outcomes for early childhood development, adult imprisonment and suicide are getting worse.
We must find a better way, and we must do it together.
The government will dump the existing community development program, replacing it with a $700 million package designed to create 3,000 remote jobs by building up community organisations. With 149 immigration detainees back on the streets following last year's High Court ruling, the government is defending its suite of measures designed to keep the community safe.
Each one of them is being continuously monitored.
Does he know where the 149 are or not?
If anyone who thinks they can get away with those, we will find you and everyone will face the full force of the law.
New laws will be introduced to criminalise the malicious publication of personal information, an act known as doxing.
Imposing penalties, that's one of the measures that we're certainly going to be looking at.
It follows the release of a WhatsApp group online divulging the names, occupations and social media details of hundreds of Jewish Australians.
If we need laws to stop people doing that, then we should.
We live in a vibrant, multicultural community which we should strive to protect.
All right, over 500,000 Victorian homes tonight are without power as all 4 units at one of the nation's largest coal-fired power stations went offline. At around 2 o'clock this afternoon, the giant Loy Yang A power station in the Latrobe Valley, of course, suffered a catastrophic outage as Melbourne's temperatures hit a high of 36 degrees. Join me now for the latest, Victorian political reporter Simon Love. Well, Simon, you're literally in the hot seat. It's still warm in Melbourne. You're out amongst it. What's the latest?
And it started raining, Peter, would you believe it? It's probably going to intensify as I talk to you. The irony of all this was it was a hot day earlier today here in Melbourne. So the air conditioners were already pumping 35 degrees, possibly even up to 38 degrees. And then the wild weather came in from the west and transmission power lines, at least 4 at Anarchy, which is a town just north of Geelong, they have come tumbling down. That has then forced and tripped off Loy Yang A, which, believe it or not, is over the other side of the state in Gippsland. So 4 units there went offline. AGL have just told us a short time ago that one of those units are back on, but still 500,000 customers across Victoria have been without power, up to 500,000 as they slowly restore it. And also the train network's been in chaos as well with many of the lines. I was just talking to my brother who said it was really hard for him to get from the city to out on the Glen Waverley line. He's had to take an alternate line because 6 of the major train lines have been down. And as well, we were just down at an intersection earlier where the lights were out, the police directing traffic. And Peter, here's the rain now. So what a day here in Victoria for this power crisis to occur.
Well, they say 4 seasons one day, mate, but we still expect to flick a switch and get some power. Not so in Victoria. I'll come back to this in a moment. Thank you, Simon. Much bigger than just Victoria too. Australia-wide power impacts and all of that. But let's get into those headlines out of Canberra today if we can. Sky News political editor Andrew Clennell joins me now. Well, I led the show with Andrew Giles yet again today in question time in the firing line, quite rightly. He's not across his brief. I think he's really lost his confidence. He's a hostage to his notes. His colleagues are certainly not with him. I think he's friendless. But I made the point, Andrew, you know, the PMO, the Prime Minister's office and the Prime Minister, they own this because they looked at this bloke all over the shop back in December as Parliament rose. He's had 2 months to get his head together and his arguments straight. He obviously hasn't. And they had a cracker of a week last year, Labor in the House. And I've called him a suicide bomber this week. I mean, he's really killed the momentum.
Yeah. It's hard to disagree. I mean, I've been saying similar things on politics now. He just doesn't look up to that parliamentary performance side of things. He can't answer the questions. It's bizarre. Some of the questions, that, like you alluded to, aren't that difficult. They're pretty much get up, say, this has happened, make it pretty factual. Then you know, if he wants, he could have a flourish at the other side saying we copped this High Court decision because of your weak legislation or something. He just doesn't punch back at all, or even attempt to punch back. He looks like he's completely stage struck. You know, he's a rabbit in headlights, or deer in headlights, whatever the saying is, Peter. So, I mean, I think he's just been, it's just one of those moments where you watch a minister and you go, well, you're not going to be a minister for very long, certainly not in immigration.
Yeah, and what surprises me, and people at home might not know this, he'd have at least 10 staff. And you know, when you've got a minister in trouble, someone from the Leader's office often goes around to their briefing. Now, every minister I've ever worked for, 7 of them, you sit down a good hour of briefing occurs every day on a sitting day, and you run through all the curly questions that your boss needs to anticipate. Yes, you'll have your dixes, you practice those, but you basically have a hit out to make sure there's nothing that's going to come at you where you haven't got a solid line. It's like they're not even doing any prep.
Yeah, I mean, you go around there and do a mock, don't you? You fire some questions at him. Oh, what's your answer? Oh, that's not really going to cut it. Why don't you try this? Yeah, it's not rocket science. I don't understand it. I think you're right to say it reflects poorly on the government as a whole. They seem to be willing to let him swing in the breeze. Maybe they think, oh, God, this guy has to do better, bugger him. But ultimately, you get judged as a government on these things. So, I mean, I thought day two today, because, he really got a sight yesterday on what was going to happen today. You'd come back and he'd be all punchy. That happened a little bit last year. There was none of that. Opposition's been quite clever on it, though. They're not going Albanese on it. They're not going to Claire O'Neill, who punches back a bit harder on it. They see this vulnerability and they're going for it. And that's often a criticism of oppositions, that they target the leader who's got the experience to just bat everything away. When you can get some scalps, you can get some junior ministers, and you can show the weak links in a government, which makes the government as a whole look a bit weaker. So, look, I think part of his issue is he's trying not to accidentally mislead. The opposition already reckons they've got him on a mislead on continuous monitoring of these criminals. But in doing so, he's projecting zero confidence, and that gives the public zero confidence.
What I found a bit fascinating, last year we talked about the fact that they pretended that they were blindsided, that they didn't anticipate they could get a decision that would go against them. Well, we all know that's rubbish. You always have a plan B. But we find out from Senate estimates last night that, in fact, his office was briefed 3 times before the High Court decision. They talked about contingencies. The minister did not front to any of those 3 briefings. He left it to his staff. Well, that's a black mark from me. But I find out today, when you look at at least 2 of those dates, one, he was in London doing sort of the rounds to drum up votes for the Voice. The other one, he went to a Voice rally in Canberra. Now, I'm sorry, mate, you're not the immigration minister. Your first job is your portfolio, and you're failing at it.
And the other question I had today out of this is, why is this an out of ministry? I know we've got Home Affairs now, but immigration's pretty damn important to the country.
No, it should be in Cabinet. Agreed. Should be in Cabinet.
Should be in Cabinet, and a more senior person than him, and that's where they've really been caught on the hop here.
Hey, just quickly, Simon Benson, we both know him well in the Australia, and he says, look, it's not a matter of when. Sorry, it is a matter of when. It's not a matter of if that Labor's going to target negative gearing. What do you think?
I don't agree, actually. But, I mean, we'll see. I mean, I interviewed Jim Chalmers' Sunday Agenda, and they're the strongest comments he's given, saying, I'm not going there. And that day, I think Cos Samaras, that Redbridge pollster, showed why. He tweeted out some information on the polling. And you know how much these guys down here are completely governed by the polling. They're led by the nose on it. It shows it's just so unpopular tinkering with negative gearing at all, including amongst Labor voters. And some of the marginal seats they need to retain, Samaras was pointing out, like Bennelong and Reid, have 10 to 15% of people property investing into negative gearing. Now, you could argue we'll grandfather it, so it's only for those buying from now on. But you know as well as I do, Peter, an election campaign, that gets lost in the noise completely. People just hear they're changing negative gearing. They think that will affect them. And also they think this will affect our wealth because of the house price, and it's game over. So, look, I mean, Jim Chalmers in his heart of hearts would like to, but he's very much about what's popular as well, and what's going to win the election. So he'd be the most enthusiastic in the government for that sort of tinker, more so than Albanese, who never ran on that platform. It was a Short and Bowen Chalmers platform. And I think he'd just look at this and say, look, there are other ways. I reckon if they're going to make a change, it'll be a tax on trusts, and take that to the election or do it beforehand, like a cracking down on trusts. That's where I reckon they'll be headed, because he was a bit more equivocal about that when I asked him about it on Sunday.
All right, we'll watch it closely. I think even if they're not out and proud about negative gearing, they'll have enough wriggle room in their language, whichever way it goes. I reckon it's on the table. But Angela Clennell, we'll see what happens. Thanks for your time. Let's go now back to that power outage in Victoria. 500,000 households. You heard from Simon Love there before. Issues with 6 metropolitan rail lines in Victoria. Of course, they're electric. And then chaos at intersections, I'm told, all the way down to Mornington Peninsula. From the Melbourne CBD, you've got lights out and, police trying to direct traffic. I'm joined now by LNP MP, former Resources Minister, though, and a bit of an electrical brain, Keith Pitt. I know I only had you on the show last night, Keith, but I tell you, this is huge in Victoria. And I reckon for the last 6 to 12 months, you and I have been talking about all the expert analysis out there saying the Victorian grid is inherently unstable. The warnings have been there for a long time. We know earlier today when we had that outage around 2 o'clock, there was demand shedding. So in layman's terms, that's telling industry to shut down their engines and send their workers home. I don't suspect you're surprised by these events today, given this foreseeability.
Peter Credlin, welcome to A Glimpse of the Future for Victoria. If you want to know what it looks like without coal-fired power, this is it. Now, there's a lot of cascading events that happen, and for all the viewers that have got a technical knowledge, please don't send me emails complaining about the way I describe this. But think about it just like the power supply in your house. Every single electrical asset is protected against overload and against short circuit. When the transmission lines fall over, you get a short circuit. It looks to protect the network by turning them off. All the things that were drawing electricity at that point in time then go to anywhere else that can find that power, and that tends to be the generators that are connected to the network. And the network cascades back on its protection system until it finds some point to stop. And in this case, it looks likely that that was Loy Yang A, and all of those units have tripped, 2,000 megawatts. Now, that is a big power station, and that is a big outage, and it's a big blackout.
I'll put that table back on the screen so people can see it at home. This was a spot price today, just skyrocketed. So when people in your state of Queensland were paying about $60 a megawatt hour for power, in Victoria, they were paying $16,600 for that same megawatt of power. That's the problem.
And right now, Peter, 500,000 of them are paying nothing because they're not connected. And this is the challenge when the network is so unstable and so reliant on intermittent wind and solar, for example. I mean, the idea that we are going to have the nation and our economy rely on the weather, and you've got extreme weather conditions in Victoria right now. Imagine if that damage was hailstorms right throughout a couple of thousand megawatts of solar panels, which you've got in Victoria, that you simply can't replace in a short period of time. Then you've got nothing. There's nothing left. Now, they'll get Loy Yang back online, depending on how long it takes. If boilers have cooled down, for example, if they've got auxiliary power, if they've got all those other things that they can get up and running and get them on quickly, you'll get your lights back on. But the last report I saw, there's over 400 faults, lightning strikes and everything else. And it's the people of Victoria that miss out, and it's industry who aren't producing anything, and their ability to pay their wages and be part of the economy is lost.
I might add too, in the west of the state, we've got some pretty significant fires in and around Halls Gap and the Wimmera area. And of course, as we know nowadays, you don't have a landline, you don't have that bit of copper to your home in case of emergency. You've got a mobile, or you've got a VoIP phone, a computer-based phone. And so when you haven't got power, you're also pretty vulnerable.
Oh, back in the old days, Peter, under telecom, for example, they used to guarantee about a 48-hour supply with battery backup because it was a centralised exchange. You've now got towers everywhere, and they do have some backup, but they tend to be a lot more short-term unless you can get diesel generators to them to make them work. So people not only lose their power, they lose their communications and their ability to call emergency services, for example. And your point about fires is exactly right. Now, Chris Bowen wants you to have more transmission lines, which are more risk and less reliability, and even more chance that you'll lose and have blackouts, lose your electricity supply over a longer period of time. This is why these proposals are so fraught with danger. They're incredibly expensive, and we are seeing the reality of it right now.
Well, Australians have got a chance to do something about it before it gets much worse. Keith Pitt, I appreciate you dropping everything to jump on tonight. I think this is a really big issue, and I appreciate your expert analysis. Thank you as always. All right, after the break, Andrew Giles got to go. I'm saying it, he has got to go. They've got to sack him or he resigns. But wait till I explain how he was given plenty of opportunities to sort this out, but he shelved them plus John Anderson and the people who voted no to the voice that are fighting back against all those yes activists. They're targeting businesses. Yes, even today, businesses like Baker's Delight. We're turning the tide, though. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Still to come, John Anderson shortly on the dire state of our Defence Force and those no supporters turning the tables on the yes voice activists. But let's go back to the state of the Parliament and the issue, of course, that's dominated question time today. I don't think it's going away anytime soon, and that's Labor's sheer incompetence in its handling of the foreign criminals issue and that performance again today, dismal performance from Immigration Minister Andrew Giles. Labor's clearly under pressure. It's showing the bloke's not across his brief and the government's bleeding on this. Joining me now for more, Shadow Attorney General Michaelia Cash. Well, Senator, Labor want to say that the threshold for putting in an application is incredibly tough. It's very high. That's why they have not yet put an application to re-detain any of these people. Now, you're a former Attorney General. Does that wash with you?
Absolutely not. You at least try on behalf of the Australian people. You either take national security and the security of Australians, Peter, seriously, or you don't. And it is pretty clear, based on what we now know, that they have made not one application in relation to hardcore criminals that were released under their watch, pedophiles, murderers, rapists, and a contract killer. Not one application has been made. And yet what do we also know yesterday, Peter? Well, apparently they had 20 lawyers working on these applications over the Christmas break. Are you kidding me? Seriously? You've got to start wondering, were Minister Giles and Minister O'Neill over the Christmas break exercising their right to disconnect? Because quite frankly, if you take national security seriously, if you believe in protecting Australians from these types of people, you at least try on their behalf. They are full of excuses and nothing more.
Last year, Giles and the Home Affairs Minister both pretended that they were caught unawares by this High Court decision. I think you were on my program making the point. You've been there before. You know, you have a plan B in case it doesn't go the way you hope. You know, fingers crossed you want to win your court case. Doesn't always work out like that. We find from Senate estimates last night, though, that there were 3 briefings provided to the minister about having a contingency for just what happened when the court went against him. Now, he didn't turn up to any of those briefings. They were held with his staff. Again, he didn't front. I don't know what he was doing on the 8th of August, but on the other 2 dates, he was attending Yes campaign rallies for The Voice, one in Canberra, and the other one, he found the time to fly to London.
Well, Peter, this government, without a doubt, has been distracted from day one by its divisive voice. Everything else went by the wayside. But, Peter, do you know what I discovered in estimates today? The Attorney General of Australia in June of last year was made aware of the comments of Justice Gleeson and the fact that Justice Gleeson gave a very clear indication that the government may well lose the case. Now, I would have thought, Peter, alarm bells start ringing. You pick up the phone to Minister Giles and Minister O'Neill and you say, Houston, we have a problem. We need a contingency plan. Peter, do you want to know what the Attorney General of Australia did instead? He actually personally signed off on the Australian Human Rights Commission intervening against the government in this case. Peter, this is Monty Python-esque. You could not script this if you tried. So the Attorney General of Australia, his fingerprints are all over this in terms of knowledge, June of last year. And quite frankly, he has some very serious questions now that need to be answered.
Thank you, Minister. I'll leave it there. Or Shadow Minister, as you are now. Thank you, Michaelia Cash. All right, let's go to that disturbing list that's been circulated by so-called progressive Palestinian activists, publishing the names of hundreds, up to about 600, I think it is, Jewish Australians. And as a consequence, they no longer feel safe in the communities where they've built their lives. The government, slow to act, woefully inadequate in my view in addressing rising anti-Semitism, is now moving to criminalise this behaviour. It's called doxing, and that's when people publish things, identifying information online about an individual with malice intent. Joining me now to discuss this and some other important issues, former Deputy Prime Minister John Anderson. Well, John, great to see you. I'm sorry I haven't got some better topics to discuss to lift us up, not drag us down, but I honestly cannot believe we're only 100 years on, not even 100 years on, from when we saw the targeting of Jewish people and their businesses in Germany in the 1930s, but here we are now.
Well, it says something about the curriculum, doesn't it, in our schools? That's the first point. And if we understood the 1930s, we might remember that some of the giants of that age, Roosevelt and Menzies, used to say that their 4 freedoms were critical if people were to live in safety and security. One of them was freedom from fear. If you are fearful, you cannot be free. You cannot reach your potential. You cannot make your maximum potential contribution to your society. And I think this outrageously cowardly way of attacking the people is actually, I've seen it referred to as a sort of digital terrorism. It is reminiscent, is it not, of the terrorism we're watching unfold in the Middle East with Hamas in extraordinary ways, hides behind women and children and dares people to shoot them. There's no courage. And it might be noted that it took this government something like 4 months to declare the outrageous slaughtering of Israeli people on the 7th of October an act of terrorism. Where's the leadership?
You were obviously, as Deputy Prime Minister, someone who sat around the National Security Committee table. What do you make of the reports today that we're pushing on with these army attack helicopters? We're going to spend $5 billion. The US don't think they're up to speed. They've scrapped the program. We're debating drones. We're not going to get to make a decision on drones, though, we're told, for 8 years. I'm not joking here. There is a move inside Defence to train eagles and other birds of prey to attack drones. That's how backward we are at the moment. And at the same time, we've got more people leaving the Defence Force than joining it. And the world's never been more of a worry.
Every day we hear of more instability globally, more threats globally, more dangers globally. Every day we hear of a further lack of capacity or loss of capacity, a loss of willpower. The point that I would want to make here is that the primary reason that our forefathers gave us a Commonwealth government was the defence and freedom of the Australian people. There's no higher duty. It therefore follows that the primary responsibility of the Prime Minister of the day is the safety and security of the Australian people. He must take control of this mess. General Haig, during the difficult days of World War I, was told by his Prime Minister, Lloyd George, that war is far too important to leave to the generals. The government of the day has its first responsibility, the defence of the realm, the safety of the Australian people. They say there's no constituency for it. There was no constituency, Peter, when we set about winding back debt. There was no constituency for getting our economic house in order. We had to build one. Now we need leadership that will build an environment in which we get serious about looking after our freedoms and our children's freedoms.
A little bit of good news. I'm pleased to bring us some little bit of good news here. Baker's Delight were targeted by voice activists, yes, voice activists, even after that very definitive result, because the owners of Baker's Delight had donated to the no vote cause. But that's actually been their undoing, hasn't it? Because the boycott hasn't worked. And in fact, a lot of people who voted no have come out in support of Baker's Delight.
Absolutely. I'll be looking for an opportunity to go and purchase something at Baker's Delight myself. But it does raise the point, what does it take for people who have these elitist views to recognise that when they deny the voice of the majority, they are behaving in precisely the same way that they condemn amongst those Americans who describe their fellow Australians as deplorables and end up with a divided country? What does it take for people to show a little bit of humility, a little bit of self-reflection and a bit of respect for their fellow Australians?
John Anson, great to have you as always. Catch you next time. All right, after the break, just on that, not a sponsorship from me. I don't have shares in Baker's Delighter, but I tell you what, get out and support them. Get out there and show your support. All right, after the break, a whole lot of stuff I want to get into, but I want to show you something I picked up over the weekend about Joe Biden, and it was just so stark for me. I want to show you tonight. Welcome back. Well, now to our courts, where an updated handbook released by the Australasian Institute of Judicial Administration this month places more weight on cultural awareness and diversity when selecting judges rather than merit. One of the attributes now of being appointed as a judge is, quote, a high degree of cultural awareness. Another is interpersonal abilities, or their ability to manage their demeanour. Diversity, as I said, another cornerstone of the Appointments Handbook. For more, I'm joined now by the Australian's Legal Affairs contributor, Chris Merritt. Well, I must be naive, Chris, because I thought you just had to have good judicial knowledge, judgment, a practical application of the law, a bit of merit, but not so it seems.
You're so old-fashioned, Peter. Merit... for centuries now has been the only criterion for appointment to the bench. This is not a radical idea. We've got to remember what this latest proposal is and where it came from. The Australasian Institute of Judicial Administration is a research organisation. It is not the peak body of the judicial officers of this country. That is a separate organisation called the Judicial Officers Association, which has strongly voiced the view that merit should be the only criterion for appointment. And it's also made the point, which might come as a bit of a surprise to the AIJA, that there is no inconsistency between merit and cultural or linguistic diversity. There are a growing number of culturally diverse judicial officers, and they've been appointed without the need for special provisions singling people out because of their cultural or ethnic background. This is what this debate shows is there'd be a bit of a division, a divide between the judicial officers, the peak body of the judges and magistrates of this country, and a research body that is not restricted to judicial officers but includes academics and librarians, well-meaning people. But I think if you want to place weight on what view you should place weight on, I'd go with the judicial officers all the time. This idea is it's part of a growing push to bureaucratise the appointment of judges, to take into account a number of criteria which are fashionable or trendy, and it's annoying a number of very senior judges. In 2017, I'll give you this example, when Robert French stepped down from the bench of the High Court, I spoke to him. We did an exit interview, and one of the points that he made was he was dead set against the bureaucratisation. That's the term he used, the bureaucratisation of the appointment system. He said, look, this is entirely within the prerogative of the executive branch of government. And I follow his logic. In our system of government, Parliament is supreme under the Constitution, and Parliament, the executive within Parliament, should take responsibility for judicial appointments, be they good appointments or bad appointments. It shouldn't be some faceless body applying some trendy criterion. It should be politicians who are answerable to the Parliament and therefore the people for their decisions. That's how it has been, and I can't see...
And they get it wrong, Chris. We can vote them out. We can't vote the judges out. We can certainly vote the politicians out. I've got to leave it there. I had a lot to say at the top of the show about this energy crisis in Victoria, but this was too important to leave tonight. Thank you for dropping in and joining us. All right, let's go to the international panel right now. Sky News contributor Kosha Garda, former Labor MP Michael Danby. Well, welcome to you both. Kosher, I wanted to make this point because I was flicking around all the US channels I like to watch on a weekend. Yes, I have no life, but anyway, there we go. And I was struck looking at this old vision of Joe Biden. Now, when I say old, I'm not going back to when he got into the Senate. I'm talking about when he was the vice president to Obama. And then you interplay that with what we're seeing now. I mean, these terrible appearances in his press conference and that special counsel report, the judge basically saying he's just a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory in such a bad way, basically, that we can't take him to task over taking classified documents out of the White House. Here's just a couple of examples.
There's some movement. There's been a response from there's been a response from the opposition. If it holds near and dear to you that you like to be able to, anyway.
Now, this isn't even 10 years ago. This is when he was vice president addressing the 2016 Democratic National Convention. Have a listen.
We cannot elect a man who belittles our closest allies while embracing dictators like Vladimir Putin.
Now, watch a longer form of that, but I mean, you get my point, Kosher. He has clearly declined.
He has, Peter. It's great to be with you. Excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. You know, it's sad on a human level when we see this. Everybody who's had aging parents or grandparents, you can see that the decline is not linear, it's exponential. And, you know, the decline that can happen in a year can be much more than what happened 5 years prior. And your juxtaposition there just shows that in a pretty searing and undeniable way. I think, you know, what you're seeing with the special counsel report that came out, such kind of video evidence that is out there and mounting, is it's becoming impossible to ignore. The whole world can see it with this evidence. And yet here we are where he is the presumptive nominee unless something changes or happens between now and election day. And it's a little bit of a head scratcher, I think, for many in the world following the US election.
And Michael, you've been in politics for years and years. You know and I know that over in China, there are people educated in US universities that can read everything that's going on in the US political scene. They parlay that back into the Politburo. There's people in Iran doing the same thing. There's people in Moscow doing the same thing. I mean, they are reading the tea leaves. They're all interpreting what they're looking at. I mean, they can see that America has never been more vulnerable.
For the sake of the United States, President Biden ought to announced that he will resign at the election, not beforehand, because we don't want Kamala Harris, who's not capable, and just an example of identity politics going in. But there is hope, Peter. There is people in the United States who are strong for the free world. McConnell's just passed the Ukraine, Taiwan, Israel bill with the Senate Democrats, and the fate of all of the countries that rely on the United States, Ukraine, Taiwan, Israel, hangs on whether the squad will vote with the mega Republicans in the House. So there's hope. That's all I'm saying.
Kamala Harris, Kosher, told the Wall Street Journal last week, though, that she is, quote, ready to serve. I mean, is she shaking her tail feather in hope there? Or, I mean, or is this a serious play?
I read that as a shot across the bow. I really do. And, you know, this is part of the conundrum that they're in with Biden still being the front runner. And then the number two is somebody who's not reliable, which makes it very, very difficult for him to step aside before the election, as Michael said. I think she's, you know, signaling there that, hey, don't just assume that you can step past me and sidestep me, because especially for the Democrats, Black America is a very, very key part of their electorate coalition strategy. And if they supersede her, or sidestep her with somebody else like Gavin Newsom from California, there could be backlash for that very important segment of the electorate. So I think she's actually making her claim in that way, and it'll be very interesting to see how all this pans out.
Hey, Michael, here on Credlin, we're watching this issue closely in the United Kingdom, where asylum seekers are all saying that Muslim asylum seekers, Islam asylum seekers are saying, oh, look, we're all converting to Christianity, meaning we can't ever be sent back home because we'll be an apostate, we'll be put to death. And so they get to stay in the UK. The latest is an Iranian pedophile who was told he had to go, but he now says he can't be deported because he's become Christian. And we had a Christian minister in the UK papers saying he's baptised over 500 migrants in the sea. More than half of them disappear as soon as they're converted. This is a worry because this will end up coming to Australia.
Well, they obviously didn't disappeared back in the sea to swim back to France. So it's a scam. People need to take affinity to religion seriously. I think in Australia, the example is that if people claim such things, then they ask them about. They do the same thing with being gay, Peter, and both of those are being used in the UK very seriously to avoid deportation. But people should be asked, what does being gay involve? You don't have to be rude about it. You have to understand something about it. You have to show a sincerity. You have to know who your boyfriend is. And similarly with Christianity. I mean, you can't just affirm that you are without knowing any of their doctrines or having any examples of going to church regularly or associating with Christian people. No, this is a scam, and it shouldn't be allowed, and there are easy ways around it if people are serious.
All right, have to go. Kosher Michael, thank you. Travel safe. See you both next week. All right, that's it for me. See you tomorrow night at 6.